Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and this morning we're visiting with Ron Hall, author of the book, Same Kind of Different as Me, and the movie, which is coming out on October 20th, Same Kind of Different as Me, a modern-day slave, an international art dealer, and the unlikely woman who bound them together. Ron Hall, welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, we're delighted to have you. Ron was an international art dealer whose long list of regular clients includes many celebrity personalities. He's an MBA graduate of Texas Christian University, New York Times best-selling author of Same Kind of Different as Me and What Difference Does It Make, and champion for America's homeless. Ron divides his time between Dallas, New York, and Brussels, and his Brussels River Ranch near Fort Worth, as he continues to speak across the country to raise awareness and funds for homeless missions. Ron, this is such a compelling story. It touches the heart in so many different ways. It's a story of America. It's a story of America's struggles. It's a story which is a commentary on the homeless situation in America and how disenfranchised, how we have marginalized something that is so important. I think that missions work out of the country are marvelous and wonderful, but the mission work is really here in America to move our homeless, our veterans, and those who have come across trouble or even born into economic difficulty. Your heart is in this area, and I just commend you for the work that you've done, the commitment you've made, and the lives you've changed. This movie's coming out on October 20th, and it tells the story of Same Kind of Different as Me. The story of Denver Moore, yourself, yes, and the woman that brought you really all together in this, who was
yes,
just extraordinary in her fearlessness, her faith, and her commitment to this. We're going to show a trailer of the movie, and I'd like you to kind of set up the trailer for us. And much of our audience may not be familiar with the book or the story, so we want to assume that we're telling them a story for the very first time.
Well, in 1998, my late wife, Debbie, had a literal dream about a homeless man, and she said that in this dream, the next morning, she said, I believe this dream was from God, because it was like right out of the verse of Ecclesiastes 9:15. There was found in the city a certain poor man who was wise, and by his wisdom, our city and our lives ultimately would be changed. And so she asked me to go into the inner city of Fort Worth, Texas, to find this literal man of her dreams. And so we drove around that first morning just looking to see. She was so excited because she never really had such a powerful dream from God before. And at least she believed at the time that it was from God. And so I agreed to accompany her through the inner city. And we didn't see this man in that first morning and afternoon that we drove around looking for him. So we decided to stop at a homeless shelter called the Union Gospel Mission and begin serving an evening meal. And we had been there for a couple of weeks serving the evening meal when all of a sudden in breaks into the dining hall in mass pandemonium, turning over tables and threatening to kill everybody in the place. And he was screaming at the top of his lungs, I'm going to kill whoever done it. I'm going to kill whoever stole my shoes. And there was this giant African-American man standing there throwing punches and screaming obscenities. And he had on no shirt and obviously no shoes and just some raggedy old breeches. But I've never been so scared in my life. I thought I was about to die, and this is not a place that I chose to be. My wife asked me to go with her. So anyway, I just fell on my knees, not in prayer, but out of fear, looking for a hiding place. And so she looked down at me and she said, that's him. And I said, that's who? And she said, that's the man in my dream. And I said, which one? And she said, the man threatening to kill everybody. And I said, and then she looked down at me on my knees and she said, and Ron, I believe I heard from God that you have to be his friend and find out if my dream is real. And I said, but Debbie, I was not at that meeting you had with God. And if I want to be friends with someone who wants to kill everybody, well, I think I should go talk to God myself. So I asked one of the homeless men who was standing next to me in the serving line, I said, who is that crazy man? And they said, well, no one really knows his name. He's been on the streets longer than anyone can remember. And but most people just call him Suicide, because messing with him is the equivalent of committing suicide. And he said, if I were you, I would stay away from him. He's crazy and he's dangerous. And I said, well, thank you for that good advice. But unfortunately, my wife believed her dream was real, or fortunately, I would say. So she convinced me that I must pursue him through the inner city. And I did that for the next 5 months. So.
Wow. Well, let's go to the trailer. And the stars in this movie are extraordinary. Greg Kinnear, Renee Zellweger. Do you say it Djimon Hounsou?
Djimon Hounsou.
Djimon Hounsou and Jon Voight star in this inspirational film based on the true story of friendship, forgiveness, and kindness. Let's go to the trailer.
I had another dream last night.
Was it a good one, or was it about me?
It was about a poor wise man who changes the city, and I saw his face.
Man, am I glad you guys showed up.
Debbie, I got a sales call at 6:30. I got to drop off contracts north of town.
No, you don't.
Is there any infectious diseases floating around this place I should know about?
Martin told me about your friend. If you don't tell Debbie, I will.
We've been married 19 years. We don't share the same life. We don't share anything.
You can leave. You choose.
We have to talk to him. That's a man from my dream. What's your name?
You don't need to know my name.
Well, I'd like to know your name.
Tell your woman to stop bothering me.
You'd be doing me a big favor to just be nicer.
You want to be my friend?
Uh-huh.
Well, I'm gonna have to think about that.
Where you from?
After Mama died, the man put me up in a little shack. He didn't tell me that I could earn some money and maybe even some respect.
You're befriending some homeless man.
You lost your mind. They're looking for handouts instead of using their hands for work.
They figure out why he wanna know me. Done some bad things.
You're not a bad man, and I'm glad we're friends. Very sexy what you did today.
Hanging out with a homeless guy.
How was it?
Actually, it was kind of amazing.
Some things you need to know about Miss Debbie. She's the only person to love you enough not to give up.
I love you, Ronnie Ray.
Whether we is rich or poor, we's all homeless. Just working our way back home.
Denver changed everything.
Our lives together would never be this beautiful.
I, along with most of the other members, have a problem with you bringing your friend around.
You can tell him that yourself. He's standing right there.
Welcome back from that trailer, Ron. It was just so touching, so moving. The flashes of the various scenes from the movie that take us to that Union mission, and we meet this character. As the book opens, and you have a new, updated version of the book that kind of coincides with the release of the movie, which adds quite a bit of information and pictures, which will reach a different audience than the original release, which I think some 12 million copies sold of the original release of the book.
Well, you know, the movie version of the book, actually the original story ends in about 2004, and that book came out in 2006. So there was a lot happened between 2006 and today. And so we added new chapters to the end of that book to bring our readers and fans up who read the first book to understand what has all happened in the last 10 years regarding me and Denver. And many people were curious, how did our story get turned into a major motion picture with Paramount as our studio and PureFlix as our distributor? So we brought everyone up to date on that, and then we take them also through our hopes and for what will come of the future from our story and our film and our book. So that's it. We added a lot of pictures that I took on set as we were making the film.
Ron, the story is a personal story to you.
It's
It
very
was the
personal.
beginning of a journey that started out in abject fear, complete,
Absolutely.
total panic. I can actually hear you saying to your wife, you heard from God, but I haven't heard from him, so you go make a friend of him. I'm hiding under the table. I'm staying here until I have my parting of the Red Sea experience.
Exactly. My Damascus Road experience is what I call it too.
There you go. Now, this journey, this story starts out with this fear, but how do you approach Denver to get to the point where you two become lifelong friends? And of course, he's passed on now, and the world is left a better place because of him. But the story kind of unfolds, and as it unfolds, you develop kind of an extraordinary relationship with him.
I did, yes. He became the best friend I've ever had in life or would ever hope to have. And he actually lived with me the last 12 years of his life.
How wonderful. When you see your story then move into a screenplay, and you are a co-author of the screenplay.
Right.
What were some of the essential elements that you were, that were your red line elements? You know, films are not always the same as the book.
Right.
And there's things that you have to do to condense, to consolidate, to compact into an hour and a half or 2 hour film.
Exactly. Yes, there was a lot that had to be left out, and that's why it's important to read the book to know the whole story. But essentially, it was the Christ-like forgiveness that my wife gave me after I cheated on her and 10 years before this story took place. And she threw my sin as far as the east is from the west, never to bring it up again. That was her promise that she made to me. And the promise I made to her on that day in 1988 was that I would do anything she asked me the rest of our lives together for that incredible grace and forgiveness that she had shown me. But she only asked me just to be faithful and not to cheat on her again. And so I was very good at that, and we put our marriage back together, and we had one of the most beautiful marriages that God ever ordained in marriage. And so we were living a really, really fruitful, beautiful life as a family and as a husband and wife. And so it was 10 years later that she had this dream about this homeless man, and she asked me to go with her and find this man, and she asked me to be the one who pursued him. And so that's the first thing that she had actually asked me to do. And so I wasn't going to tell her no, even though it was not my idea to be friends with a man who was known as suicide on the streets. And so reluctantly, I would say, I began pursuing him almost on a daily basis for 5 months until I finally got him in my car and took him to breakfast one morning. And all of that saga and intrigue on how he finally got in my car is really part of the story as well. But I get him in the car one morning. We go to breakfast, and I found out that he had a very, very tragic life. He had grown up on a plantation in Louisiana in the 1930s and 40s and early 50s, and he'd never gone to school a day in his life. He'd never been allowed the opportunity to go to school, so therefore he was totally illiterate. He did not read nor write. And something very tragic, not only did he watch his grandmother burn up when he was about 6 years old in a fire on the plantation in the shotgun house that they lived in, and he tried to drag her out and save her, and he was not able to, and he barely saved himself. So, but I would say that then, and when he was a young teenage boy, a very innocent young teenage boy on the plantation, he was roped and dragged by the Ku Klux Klan for helping a white woman change a flat tire on the plantation. And the Klansmen that day extracted a promise from him that he would never again speak to a white woman and never again look a white man in the eye. And he had been living that life, keeping that promise to himself until he encountered my late wife, Debbie, who was very persistent that he was a man that God had a calling on his life and he was going to live to see it. And so she just kept chasing him through the inner city, and she wouldn't leave him alone. So on that breakfast that morning, he asked me, he said, "What is it you want from me?" He said, "I've had no peace in my life since your skinny little wife showed up on the streets of Fort Worth." And he said, and I said, "Hey man, I just want to be your friend." And he looked at me with this incredulous look, and he said, "You want to be my friend?" And I said, "That's all. I just want to be your friend." But that was actually not being honest, because Debbie wanted me to be his friend. I was just doing it at her insistence. And I actually thought he might kill me. He was so dangerous and crazy. And that would be my punishment for having cheated on her, 10 years before. But anyway, when I asked him to be my friend, he said, "I'm going to have to think about that." And I thought, man, I can't believe I was so arrogant that I didn't believe that how he could, he's trying to tell a wealthy man who's asking him to be his friend that he's going to think about it. I didn't believe he had one thing to offer me in a friendship. And so, therefore, my arrogance was coming through. I said, "Hey, you're looking a gift horse in the mouth. You are the man of my wife's dream. And if you want some new clothes or a house, car, anything you want, I can do it for you because I'm wealthy and you're poor." And that was just the arrogance that I was showing. And so it was a couple of weeks later that I saw him taking trash out of a dumpster. And he lived by this dumpster in the inner city, and he was taking trash out of it, and he was feeding the wild animals on the street. And I said, "Would you like to go get some coffee?" And he said, "Yeah, that would be good." So we went to Starbucks, and we were sitting on a sidewalk cafe, and he said, "I've been thinking a lot about what you asked me." And I said, "What did I ask you that required any thought?" And he said, "You asked me if I would be your friend." And I said, "Yes, I did. So what do you think about that?" He said, "Well, to tell you the truth, there's something I heard about white folks that really bothers me, and it's got to do with fishing. So I need an answer before I tell you if I'm going to be your friend." And I said, "Well, Denver, I'm an art dealer, I'm a rancher, but I don't have a rod and reel or a tackle box, so I'm not sure I could answer your question." He said, "Oh, I bet you can." And he said, "But I heard when white folks go fishing, they do this thing they call catch and release." And I said, "Oh, Denver, yes." I said, "It's a sport. You don't get it?" He said, "No, sir, I don't get that." Because back on the plantation where I grew up, we'd go out in the morning, we'd dig us a can full of worms, we'd cut us a cane pole, and we'd sit on the riverbank. And when we finally got something on our line, we were really proud of what we caught. He said, "So it occurred to me, if you're just a white man that's fishing for a friend, and you're going to catch and release, then I ain't got no desire to be your friend." And I'll tell you, my mind flashed back to Debbie's dream of this poor man who was wise, because what he spoke to me that moment was the wisest thing I'd ever heard on friendship. And I'm not one that hears from God or believes that I heard from God, but at that very moment, I believe that God spoke to me and he said, "Take a chance, be his friend, and don't catch and release." So I said, "Okay, Denver, if you'll be my friend, I will not catch and release." And he said, "Nor will I. You got a friend for life." And I said, "You do too." So.
It's just so touching. This is such a real piece of the backbone of America. This is the Walt Whitman. This is the Garrison Keillor. This is wisdom without education.
Exactly.
This is purity of life and the reality of perception of an outsider looking in at the world that we could never understand had you not had this relationship with him. There are many things, I think you call them Denverisms.
I sure do.
That he shared with you, and that was one of them that was the most, really, the start. That was the genesis of the friendship. And
yes, he hooked me. That's why I'm here today.
He hooked you. He really did. Over time, you two built an extraordinarily close relationship. It was as fulfilling for you as it was for him. And as the world looked on, you had this art dealing world that you were in. You were $1 million deals of Georgia O'Keeffe paintings that you were actually, you made the deal with one, you took them, got them back, sold them to another. You were a wheeler dealer.
I was, yes.
And the two extremes that God brought together is just really extraordinary. In your wife leading you, directing you to get involved in this homeless ministry was a gift that she was going to give you that has served you for all these years as the fulfillment of your life.
Exactly. You know, I say, Eric, that I became wealthy as an art dealer, traveling the world and selling great masterpieces, but Denver made my life rich. You know, he moved into my home with nothing, and he gave me everything.
What was that like for him? For you, it was venturing into the unknown. For him, it was crossing a line that had been so clearly established. The opening of the book tells Denver's point of view about that day on the road when
Yes.
the woman's car, and she asked him if he had a jack, and he did. And the young man came riding up on horseback, and they were going to teach him a lesson. And here he was being a good Samaritan. Here he was
Yes.
doing the right thing. And
Exactly.
it was beat out of him. And
Yes.
this anger, this rage that permeated everything was because of this wretched mistreatment of him, for the simple reason that his only crime was being black. And I can relate my only crime as being a Jew. And,
Okay.
and know
Yes.
that our lineage and bloodline, our race, is what
Yes.
unfortunately in the world defines us, but it's not supposed to. That's not the way
No.
it's supposed to be. Your book resonated with millions upon millions of readers. It touched their lives. Today, we're struggling in this country with either a perceived or a real racial divide. Whether it's perceived or real doesn't really matter, since perception becomes reality. Unfortunately, I've never talked to a racist because everybody denies, and no one ever says to me that they've demonstrated racial preference or racial discrimination, but we know it's there. Somebody is doing it. They may not be in our particular sphere of influence or life, but the world caught this same kind of different as me vision. And what was it that you feel was the real, you got hooked because of Denver,
Right.
and his raw sense of right and wrong, his raw sense of justice, his raw sense of the perception of a white man.
Yes.
But the world caught this vision.
Well, you know, I think that the story resonates on so many levels. You know, it's not only just homelessness and Denver and racial issues. It was marriage, putting a marriage back together, putting a relationship of a father and son back together, but which Denver forced me to repair my relationship with my alcoholic father. And it was the most beautiful thing that happened to me, besides restoring my marriage and being a father and all. But the real message behind our film, that I think if you just go to the very bottom of it, it's that it's not the color of our skin that divides us. It's the condition of our hearts.
Yes.
And if we get our hearts right, we will love everybody. It's just, you know, everyone with the right heart cannot be angry or cannot be mean to anyone else. And our story really is about making a difference. You know, Denver used to say that all the cities and a lot of people think of homelessness as a problem. But in his wisdom, he saw it as an opportunity for the faithful to show the love of God and change cities. Yeah.
It's just such a compelling story. We're talking with Ron Hall, author of the book, Same Kind of Different as Me, co-writer of the screenplay of the movie by the same name, full feature by Paramount, and distributed by Pure Flix, that will release on October the 20th. I would encourage you to read this book and watch the movie. The book is updated with information over the last 10 years that takes you to what happened after the book ended what's gone on and what Denver's life was for the 12 years that he lived with Ron. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about forgiveness. We're going to talk about reconciliation. We're going to talk more about same kind of different as me. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere, and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Ron Hall, author of the book, Same Kind of Different as Me, screenwriter extraordinaire of the movie, feature film to be released and in theaters on October 20th, starring Greg Kinnear, Renee Zellweger, Jaimin Hansu, playing the part of Denver Moore. And so this is just an extraordinary story. You know, when we were going to break, you talked about forgiveness and reconciliation. And you shared that your wife had forgiven you.
Yes.
But yet it was Denver who encouraged you to reconcile and to forgive your father. And
that's true.
In that forgiveness, and you just shared with me on break that you have decided to explore your father's life to find out what was behind the curtain.
Yes.
Think of the Wizard of Oz, paying no attention to the man behind the curtain, but yet you wanted to go behind the curtain to find out what was this compelling reason for his struggle.
Yes.
And the compassion, the reconciliation, the forgiveness, this really is the message of Same Kind of Different as Me.
It is. You know, Eric, my good friend Denver, and one of his Denverisms, when he first got to know my father, who was in fact a racist, and my father was so angry at me for becoming a friend with Denver, and he treated Denver very unkindly and very rudely, and when he was around us. But Denver took me aside one day and he said, "You got to bless him, Mr. Ron." He said, "You know, your old daddy's got a lot of hell in him. You just got to bless the hell out of him." And so that's what I began to do at Denver's insistence, to just bless my father until the hell left him, and he decided to become a Christian and be with a transformed life in the last year of his life. But it was the most beautiful year that I ever spent, and it was with my father and learning what caused him all the pain and anguish that he drowned through alcohol.
Ron, as you tell this story, I'm seeing Denver as a man of God. I'm seeing him as an ambassador of the way that God works to bind up the brokenhearted, to set the captives free. We see this, but yet here's a man that couldn't read or write.
That's right.
But yet he was espousing biblical truth, biblical wisdom, and this ministry of reconciliation that seemed to be for a man who had anger and social deficits, if you will, that were beat into him.
Well, he lived like a wild animal on the streets by a dumpster.
Tremendous amount of wisdom.
He did. You know, the first morning I was sitting with him on the curb after we became friends, after our catch and release meeting, he asked me, he said, "Are you one of them Christians?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Well, there's something about you Christians that bothers all of us homeless people." And I said, "What is that, Denver?" And he said, "Why is it that all you Christians worship one homeless man on Sunday, then turn your back on the first one you see on Monday?" He said, "Mr. Ron, you never know whose eyes God is watching you out of, and it ain't going to be your preacher or your Sunday school teacher." He said, "It might just be a fellow like me." He said, "But it ain't me. But it might be a fellow that looks like me." So
I'm stunned by the brilliance and the insight of that statement.
Well, he told me also, he said, "Look down at the end of that street. What do you see?" And I said, "Well, that's the courthouse." And he said, "Exactly." He said, "Let me tell you something, Mr. Ron. That courthouse is full of judges. God don't need no more judges. He needs servants. So if you're going to be walking the streets with me, you need to serve and not judge."
How old was he when you met him?
He was 62 years old, and he had been homeless on the streets for 25 years after being in prison for 10 years in Angola State Penitentiary in Louisiana for trying to rob a city bus to get a hamburger. So,
wow. And how did he get to Fort Worth?
Hopped a freight train. When he left the plantation initially, he hopped a freight train just to get away from the man who had held him basically as a modern-day slave, never really paying him any folding money like Denver would say, but he gave him credit at the store on the plantation. So he got to eat and he got to live in a free shack, and he got a hog every year for Christmas, and that was how he maintained it. And supported his life was working for the man and raising his own food and vegetables and eating that hog that had to last him a year. So.
As you began to see homelessness through the eyes of a homeless man,
I did.
What were some of the inherent truths that you learned that reshaped all of your thinking? That your perception of homelessness and the reality of homelessness, the view from this side of it versus the view from that side of it. What were some of the stunning revelations for you?
Well, I was a big judge of people that homelessness was their choice, that they had made so many bad choices in life that they were getting, they were having to pay for their bad choices. And but just the other night, I was speaking in Houston, Texas, and I walk out of the hotel, and they're trying to run a homeless man off the lot. But he was a man with a broken hip, and he couldn't move fast enough. So I was going to help him, and began a conversation with him to find out he had a job, he had a car, he had an apartment, and he broke his hip. He had no insurance. He was not able to work. He lost all of that. He's ended up sleeping on the bridge, and then the hurricane comes in, and so all of these kind of things. He was a veteran. He was a Vietnam veteran, and all of these things that just piled up on him at once, and he had ended up on the streets, and he had no family there. And this is what I've learned so often in my now 20 years of working with the homeless. The number one cause of homelessness is not what we think it is. It's not drugs and things like that. The homeless don't run out of money. They run out of relationships. They run out of family. They run out of people that love them and want the best for them and care for them. And that's the only thing that actually restores their lives. Money and government and all those kind of things really can't restore a homeless man. They may keep him alive with a food or shelter, but the only thing that makes a difference in their lives, that makes them want to change, is love. And that's where it takes relationships to do that.
Ron, I was homeless in 1980.
Wow.
2 years.
Wow.
I can speak to that very thing. I had a business. I lost the business. I lost my home. I was put out on the street. I was very fortunate that I had a friend who worked for a limousine company and got me a job driving a limousine, so I get to keep the car. And I wound up sleeping in hotels all over Atlanta because the service industry takes care of the service industry. Right. So I would go through the back door of hotels, sleep in hotel rooms, and eat off of hotel menus and room service. I would eat half-eaten trays of room service left outside. I had 2 suits that I could take with me. I had them cleaned in the hotel by the service people that worked there. They didn't have security back in the 80s like they have today. And so we were a counterculture. We were a subculture in the service industry. And that went on for 2 years until I had Bert Lance, the Office of Management and Budget in the Carter administration, in my limousine, who said to me, "What are you doing driving a limousine? You're a college graduate. You've been in the corporate world." And I told him my story. And he wound up helping me get a job at AT&T, where I worked for many, many years, and moved through the executive ranks of the company. But 2 years, I lived off the streets. I wasn't under a bridge, and I didn't have nothing. I was very fortunate that it was actually, I had more money in my pocket than I did when I was working because I had no expenses. The gasoline was paid for. I wasn't paying for room and board. So it was a subculture. And it wasn't that I was a drug addict or an alcoholic. I don't drink, and I wasn't taking drugs. And so it's just, and I was too embarrassed to tell my family that I had lost everything and that I had no resources. And I had a friend who was a fringe kind of guy. I knew him, I met him, and we maintained an acquaintanceship, but he was the one I reached out to because I knew he had connections. And,
yes.
What can we do, Ron? What should we do? How large is this problem in America today?
It's an enormous problem, Eric, and it's a faith-based problem. It's not a government problem. It's not anything but a faith-based problem. It's a condition of the heart. And it was in Atlanta. It's funny that you were mentioning that that's where you were homeless, because it was in Atlanta where Denver first observed and got clear message from God on how to end homelessness in America. And we were there, and they were telling us their 10-year plan to end homelessness in America. And Denver asks, said, why is it going to take y'all 10 years to solve this problem in Atlanta? And they said, well, first of all, it's taken us a year and nearly $1 million to do the study. And he said, now we have to start acquiring the land, building the buildings, hiring the staff and all of these kind of things. And hopefully by 7 or 8 years, we will start seeing some great results. In 10 years, we hope to have no homeless on the streets. And Denver said, well, how many homeless do y'all have here on the streets? And they said, we have about 6,000 homeless that spend the night in shelters or put back out on the streets during the day in Atlanta. And he said, well, how many churches y'all have in y'all's town? And the head of the Greater Council of Churches said, we have more than 6,500 churches. And Denver said, there you go. Every church take them one. Some churches ain't getting none. And we're going to take care of this problem in 30 days. And that's exactly what we preached that all across America now. And you know how many churches I've heard from that took in a homeless person, that I've spoken to millions of people and probably hundreds of thousands of churches. I can count on one hand the people that have told me we followed what your advice that Denver's plan to end homelessness, and we've taken in and caring for one homeless person.
Ron, we've lost our way. We've absolutely lost our way. When the United Way was formed, when public charities were formed, it was a clarion message to the church that you weren't doing your job in the community, and the government has to step in, charities have to step in to do what you were supposed to do. Now, we're good at responding to disasters in the hands and feet of Jesus, in tragedies that affect everyone, but the tragedies that affect one seem to be overlooked. And I'm not saying that I do anything in this realm or this area other than preach in the homeless shelters and preach in the recovery centers and go down there and minister the gospel in these places and provide books for teaching. All of my books are available to all of those centers. I bring them there when I preach and give them to their intake people so that there's a recipe in there for how to live a fruitful life regardless of means or circumstances. And so I believe in certain ways, and we, of course, expose these kind of issues in the program. And I don't have a church or a facility. But why is there such resistance?
Well, most people look at the homeless like the priest and the Levite did in the story of the Samaritan. When they size up the man on the streets or in the ditch, they ask themselves, what is going to happen to me if I stop and help that person? It's not going to be pleasant. They may try to harm me. They may ask me for money. They think of all kinds of excuses, so therefore they want them to become invisible. But the good news is about the Samaritan is that when he saw the man there in the ditch dying, he looked at him and said, what is going to happen to him if I don't help? And this is why we have created a society now that does not feel the way that if they need to stop and help. They just say, let me get out of here as quickly as I can to avoid any unpleasantness that I have to. You know, the guy comes up to them at the street corner and they won't even roll their window down. They don't make eye contact. They want them to be invisible. And Denver told me one day, he said, Mr. Ron, whether we are rich or whether we are poor or something in between, this earth ain't no final resting place. So in a way, we're all homeless, just working our way home. He said, so don't discriminate against those that actually don't have houses, because we're all homeless.
The impact of your foundation now can be translated into lives impacted and shelters and facilities and programs for the homeless. This movie will certainly bring the plight of the homeless to light if people will pay attention to the message. In your mind, what is the core message you want to deliver through this film?
Well, I do want people to know that they can make a difference, that nobody can help everybody. But in the famous words of my friend Denver, everybody can help somebody. And I want them to come away from this film with new eyes, to see the homeless through the lenses of God, and realize that just by the grace of God that we are not just like them or in their situation, and be willing to just start one. Just with a random act of kindness, we've started a whole new movement through PureFlix called Making a Difference. And on October the 18th, we have 160 cities across America that are going to be showing our movie 2 nights before it comes out in theaters. And it's going to be a night to make a difference across America and raise awareness and begin to see communities that want to make a difference in their communities and seeing the homeless through new eyes.
Ron, it's just extraordinary what you're doing. The film and the book bring this message of kindness, compassion, and forgiveness. I think those are the 3 characteristic words, the 3 core messages of this. You saw forgiveness in your life, but you saw forgiveness in Denver's life. And a man who was filled with rage turned into a man filled with compassion.
Yes.
As you watch that unfold, did you begin to see yourself as, here you were the successful businessman, but maybe saw yourself lacking in humanity when you saw real humanity through the eyes of Denver?
Exactly. I did. You know, this really, the message here, I don't want anyone to ever think that I was Denver's savior. That this is not a rich white man that was saving and a very, very poor, illiterate African-American man. You know, we were thrown together by a dream to save each other. And Denver stayed fundamentally true to himself. I had the most changing to do. And through God's mercy and grace, he gave me a friend that pointed out all the things that I needed to see in my life, that where I could come back and be able to serve and be willing to serve and be used by God. Because all I saw myself was just, I was very arrogant. But I began to see that, you know, I was a sinner and Denver was a sinner, but our sins were just different. And we came together to encourage each other and ultimately to save each other from ourselves and from.
Ron, did Denver mellow over time? Did his anger turn into more pontification and more philosophical point of view?
Well, actually, the first night I moved him into my home, you know, I say now that he came to my home with nothing, and he gave me everything. But the first night I moved him into my home, he brought his baseball bat, and he was uncomfortable staying in the house because he'd lived outside for so long that he went outside to sleep in the bushes. And I just happened to go outside walking by some bushes, not knowing he was there. And I awakened him, and he jumped out of the bushes and took a swing at me with a baseball bat and started screaming at me, "Man, don't you never sneak up on me like that in the bushes. You get yourself killed." And I said, "Denver, this is my house." And he thought about it for a minute, and he said, "Oh, man, I'm sorry." He said, "It sure is." He said, "Well, welcome home." You know, but, you know, this is how we started our lives together, that, you know, for the next 10 years, we sat at the breakfast table, we began writing and telling our story, because he said, nobody's ever going to believe our story. We've got to write us a book. But he didn't know how to read and write, so he was just telling me the story, and so I was writing it. But I'll tell you, near the end of his life, he became so soft and so mellow. He would just sit and weep just at the forgiveness that he had been shown, the mercy and the love. he had never used the word love before in his life, and he began to use it all the time. It was just such a beautiful thing, and I've just written a book about those 10 years or 12 years I call Working Our Way Home, and Thomas Nelson will be publishing it, and it'll come out right after the new year in 2018.
I would love to have you back to talk about the follow-on story, because the story of compassion, the story of love, the story of forgiveness, the story of reconciliation is what keeps America as such a great country, that two worlds colliding as your two worlds collided. And the one who got changed was you.
Well, I had a lot of changing to do. It's when you say that, talking about America, we were invited to the White House. Denver became such a national figure that the President Bush and First Lady Laura Bush, we got invited to the White House. And Barbara Bush became one of our biggest fans, and it was one of her all-time favorite books, and we spoke on behalf of her Literacy Foundation. And so they invited us to the White House. And when we were through with that luncheon, Denver started laughing, and he said, "Mr. Ron, I done gone from living in the bushes to eating with the bushes." He said, "God bless America. This is a great country." And I said, "Yes, it is a great country."
Perspective. Ron, the last minute or so that we have, what message do you want to deliver to the audience about how they can make a difference in someone's life the way that you and Denver made a difference in each other's life?
Well, I think just with our new Making a Difference campaign, that they can look online for PureFlix and for our film and Making a Difference campaign, same kind of difference as me. But it can all begin with just a random act of kindness. A random act of kindness has no shorelines. It's infinite, the ripple effect of those acts of kindness. It can begin with just asking someone what their name is, asking a homeless person, "What is your name? How did you get in this mess? And what's the one thing that could change your life that I could be praying about you, for?" I'm not here to give you money today. I'm here just to encourage you that God does change lives. And so just begin some conversation that might end. There's so many Denvers out there to save, and so many Denvers that can save us from our own self-centeredness and arrogance. And in the end, if we can get a national movement like that, our nation will really be changed and blessed.
This random act of kindness will change a life. Sometimes the life that gets changed is your own.
That's right, exactly.
We've been talking with Ron Hall, author of Same Kind of Different as Me, with Denver Moore. This extraordinary story about how God brought together through a dream two people from the most polar opposites in the world, to find out that they were one in compassion, one in forgiveness, one in reconciliation, bring a message to the world that says that no matter where you come from, humanity is humanity. We are all God's creation. And God put an infinite amount of love within us for our fellow man, that while we're on this earth, we should be reconciling the world. As Paul said, this ministry of reconciliation. I encourage you to get the book. Visit our books and media page on ignitingnation.com. Scroll down to today's date. Get the book, Same Kind of Different as Me, with the additional text from the last 10 years. And mark your calendar for the premiere, October the 20th, 2017, at a theater near you. Same Kind of Different. Greg Kinnear, Renell Zellweger, and tell me his name again?
Jaimin Hansu, and John Hoyt plays my father.
Large, eloquent African-American actor who you will recognize from stage and screen. And Ron Hall, thank you so much for being with us. And I promise you, we will see you again right back here on Revealing the Truth with your next book. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.